Hello, I'm Deb Morgan of Not a Rehearsal, and I've got the honour and privilege of interviewing some of the authors from this incredible book, Revival, Women Embracing Their Superpowers. And I'm joined by Ali Jones today, who's one of the authors, and she is a positive impact coach and speaker at YBU Coaching. Ali, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much. I'm really actually privileged to be here. It was a great privilege to be in the book, and it's wonderful to be interviewed afterwards. So thank you for having me.
Well, let's start first of all then with, how did you end up being in the book? What drove you to contribute your story to the book?
I've always had a burning kind of need to write a book. It's always been in me. When I was a kid, I wrote stories after stories after stories. I remember some of my earlier teachers saying, you need to be a writer when you're older. I've always had a passion for writing. It then kind of waned away, and you know how life gets in the way and children and everything else. It kind of went on the back burner completely. And then I joined Revival Sanctuary last year, which was a fantastic decision that I made, because it just kind of opened up these different opportunities, the book being one of them. And it actually wasn't planned that I was going to do the book. This is the funny thing. I heard about it and I thought, oh, there's no way I can do that, because, you know, I've not been in Revival that long, and then I'm sure all the spaces have gone. And then I happened to say to Sharon, is there any chance, you know, that I can get in the book? And she said to me, if you can get me a story across in 48 hours, you're in. And I'm like, done. And that's why I'm the last one in the chapter. That's why I'm at the end of the book, because literally I was thelastminute.com, and I got the story done and over to her like literally in a couple of days. So yeah, I was very lucky to just have that small window to get in.
Fantastic. And what a story. I mean, I read your story, and any one of the things that you've been through would have been enough to floor somebody else. But you just kept on going and kept on going. And, you know, you've had to battle pretty much all the way through your life, from what I could see in your story. What is it that gives you that resilience to keep on going?
Do you know what? I've been asked this a few times, and a little while ago, up till recently, I didn't know the exact answer to this. But all I can say is that deep inside of me, I've always known I had a purpose. And that small burning kind of ball that was tiny inside of me, as life went on and I went through more and more of the crappy things, this ball got bigger and bigger. So it was almost like this defiance that every time I went through something else, it was like this ball got bigger, and it was like, no, you need to be here because there's a reason. And so when it got to the point where I'd lost my home, lost my furniture, lost my dad, lost my husband type of thing, my marriage broke down, all in the space of like a year, 18 months, I kind of like, I did hit rock bottom, and I did want to give up. But this kind of desire to, this kind of burning kind of ball that was in me, that was just like, you know, you need to be here. There is a purpose. You're here for a purpose. It was bigger than it had ever been. And I just knew. I remember one day sitting outside, and I was crying, and I thought, why, you know, the typical things, why me? What have I done so wrong? What do I have to do in life to kind of stop all this pain, all this kind of loss, all this heartache and kind of tough times? And I remember just looking up to the sky and going, why? And I don't know what happened. It wasn't like an epiphany. I wouldn't say it was an epiphany, but it was just like this sudden calm came over me. And it was just like, do you know what? You know your why. You just need to just have faith in that why, and just, you'll be fine. And then this kind of like ball almost like didn't settle, but it was almost like, it was like an exhilaration of like, yes, it's finally connecting. It's finally connecting. And so I didn't know back then quite what it was I needed to do. But I knew it was in some way aiding other people. And I've always kind of known that actually all the way along, that, you know, I kind of was one of those magnets that people resonated to sort out their problems and listen to their woes, and, you know, and kind of, I suppose I've always been quite a strong person. But this kind of ball, this kind of thing that kept me going, it was just this intuition, I'd say, this knowing that I had a bigger purpose than me, that I had to stop being selfish almost and thinking, why me? And actually think, okay, this is me. What can I do for everybody else now because of me, because of this? So yeah, it was kind of a kind of going inside and realizing that the why me thing was, it was okay, I could wallow in that for a little bit, but then I needed to put that aside and kind of work on the why I'm here. So yeah.
And you've been through that a few times, haven't you? Because you talk about hitting rock bottom and about sort of picking yourself back up and keeping going because you had this faith, this belief in this purpose. But there was another time as well, wasn't there, that you hit rock bottom to the point where you were told you had a week to live.
Yeah, it sounds really dramatic actually when people say it back like that. When I was younger, I went on a really, really, I suppose, I don't like to use the word bad because it's not, but I made some decisions that were less desirable, let's say, and I ended up on the path of drugs and alcohol and, you know, not settling in relationships and kind of just that path that you get on. My dad was an alcoholic. He was a beautiful soul. He was a lovely soul, but he, you know, he wasn't perfect. And likewise, my mum, again, another beautiful soul, but both kind of lacking in kind of really fantastic parenting skills, let's say. They did their best, but you know, the lifestyle that I grew up in, which was moving around constantly from all my life, basically gave me no stability. I went to so many schools, homeschooling. We moved not just places, we moved countries. So I had no stability, no roots, and this and the, you know, the lifestyle that my parents had with the partying, the drinking and stuff led me on a similar lifestyle myself. And I ended up, you know, going down the route of drinking lots and drugs and things. And I was living in Spain for 2.5 years and progressively just getting worse and worse and worse. And I was taking cocaine, I was taking ecstasy, I was drinking from 12 o'clock in the afternoon, well, 12 o'clock lunchtime, I'd be like, right, okay, beer. By 6, 7 o'clock, I was on the vodka or, you know, the whiskey and something else. And it got to the point that it was actually the second of January, I think it was, or 3rd of January. It was around my birthday. No, it was the 2nd of January. I woke up and I'd been on a complete bender over the new year, and I couldn't move. I was like paralyzed. I could not move. My parents were out because they were living in Spain for a while as well, and I think I was living back. No, I wasn't. I was living in an apartment near them, just up the road. Literally about 200 yards was a clinic, a doctor's clinic. Thank goodness. And I couldn't move for about 3 or 4 hours. And basically, a friend ended up coming around, and I called them, and they helped me. Eventually, I started to be able to move with it, but I was in absolute sheer agony. And they helped me to walk up to the clinic. And the doctor did some. I mean, I was in absolute agony, as I said. The doctor gave me morphine and Valium and God knows what else, and he did some tests, and he did all these sorts of like check me out and my bloods and everything. And he basically said to me, I don't need to know what you're doing. He said, because just from your body, I can tell that the lifestyle that you're leading. And he said, but what I can tell you, he said, that if you continue to do what you're doing, he said, you'll be dead in about a week. He said, you've got pleurisy on your lungs, around your lungs, which is fluid around the lung. He said, you've got pneumonia already in one lung. He said, which will shortly be in both. He said, you've got kidney stones that have got so big they've lacerated the insides of your kidneys, which is the pain that you're feeling right now. So he said, your kidneys are bleeding on the inside. He said, which is why there's so much blood in your urine. And he said, and I've got to put you on loads of stuff. He said, really, I need to admit you to the hospital. And I was like, no, I can't go to hospital. I can't go to hospital. I said, just give me the drugs. Just give me everything you need to give me. I said, I promise I'll stop drinking. I promise I won't, I won't take anything anymore. It was a huge wake up call. And I remember going to see my parents and saying to them, look, I knew I had to get out of Spain. I knew that if I stayed in Spain, I would continue on that cycle. And I just said to them that I need to go. And they were like, what? Because, I was 21 at the time, and I couldn't really say to them, well, I'm really, really, screwed up. And I didn't want to say to them how many drugs I was taking. So I just said, look, really need to go. I'm not well. I've got pneumonia, and I need to go back to England. And they kind of didn't know the whole story. My dad did actually. My dad knew, but my mum didn't. And yeah, and within 24 hours, I was on within less than that, I was on a plane going back to the UK. And yeah, I just had to basically be on loads of medication and get myself well. I didn't work for, I think, 6 weeks. I took off work, and then I was back at work full time again after that. Yeah, and then 6 months after that, I broke up with the guy I was with, who I left Spain with. We had a huge fallout, and I broke up with him, and that's when I had the mental breakdown. I just, at that point, I think my whole body, my mental state, and everything just kind of gave up at that point. It was tired.
My
So, yeah,
goodness.
yeah.
But that wasn't the end of it, was it?
No, it didn't wake me up enough. I did kind of stop most of the drugs and drinking, most of it, but I continued the cycle. I just ended up, I ended up a year later having a child. It wasn't the kind of the wake up call I was expecting. It wasn't planned. I love it now, obviously. It's the best thing. And that did wake me up a little bit, but I was still in the cycle. So I was with an aggressive alcoholic partner at the time. We managed to try and make a go of it. I managed to save up loads of money, and I don't even know how I did that. And I borrowed and scrimped and scraped, and and went without, and managed to get a deposit for a really cheap house of somebody I knew where I worked wanted to go back up north, and they were willing to sell their house to me cheaper than the market value. And I remember thinking, I'm going to get this house, I'm going to get this house. And I just decided that was it, that house was going to be mine. I knew it was my one and only chance to get on the mortgage ladder. And I managed to do that, and I managed to get the house. And then I ended up pregnant with my second child about a year after we moved in. But that wasn't happy days either, because 6 weeks after I had the child, my partner disappeared for a whole night, which was not normal. He'd been acting strange throughout my pregnancy, and had started going in the spare room saying, I'm gonna, I need to get up in the morning, you need the space, and we're disturbing each other and things. And then he disappeared all for like 24 hours, and I didn't know what would happen. I thought, oh my goodness, he'd never done this before. I put up with a lot of stuff from him. He was quite aggressive when he drank. I got the typical "I'm sorry, I won't do it again" type scenarios. And I just remember saying to him, I can deal with most things, but just don't ever cheat on me, because this is something I'd grown up and experienced, and I just couldn't deal with that in my life. No, I would never do that. I would never do that. So at this point, I'm thinking, no, he wouldn't do that to me. After everything he puts me through, I'm sure he wouldn't do that to me. And anyway, the alarm bells went off when he didn't come back. He did turn up. He phoned me from work and said, I'm really sorry. That work still went on. I ended up getting too drunk and fell asleep on someone's sofa, which is why I didn't call you. I just thought, that doesn't ring true. When you just intuition tells you it's not. So for the next week, I remember being quite sneaky. I'm not a sneaky person, but I became a really sneaky person. I got numbers off his phone. I was trying to look at his phone, and I noticed when I was trying to look at his phone now, because it's not something I normally did, he was being quite sketchy with it. It was like he was like, oh, what are you doing, kind of thing. And I was thinking, definitely alarm bells were going off now. So anyway, 2 weeks after he did it the first time, it happened again. And so I thought, yeah, okay, there's no smoke without fire. So I waited till the morning. Didn't ring the hospitals or the police trying to see if he'd fallen, if he was dead in a ditch this time. I thought, no, you're not. And the next morning, when I knew he would have gone to work, the time he would have been at work, I phoned one particular number that had jumped off the page at me. I don't know why, but this particular number. And I called and I said, I'll call him Henry for now. I said, hi, is this lady answers, and I went, hi, is Henry there? And she said, oh no, Henry, you mean Louisa's friend? No, they're both gone to work now. Can I give him a message? And I was like, no, you're okay. Thanks anyway. And then I literally went upstairs, packed all of his stuff into a holdall and black bags, and threw it on the lawn. And yeah, that was the end of that relationship. He was quite angry when he got back, but I just thought, you know what, I can put up with having glasses smashed at my feet, lighters thrown at me, the aggression and all of that. But that is something, there's a line and you just crossed it, and I'm not tolerating that. I'm not, I'm not putting up with being cheated on. So that was the end of that. We made a lot of money on that house because it was the time of the boom, and I then the following year got with my other with my future husband and got with him. That was a different relationship. He wasn't aggressive in any shape or form in that way, but he was narcissistic and controlling. And he tried his best. I wouldn't say he's a nasty person, but he had nasty tendencies, and especially when he wanted his own way and when he wanted to control things. It was the kind of thing of, I'd move a picture in the house because I didn't like it there, and then the next day I'd go, that picture's back, and the picture would be back on the wall where it was. Little things like that. But I ignored it for a while, and then something happened. I had a child with him, so that was my third child. And then a week before I was due to give birth to my fourth child, we were in the throes of starting a business together. We'd remortgaged the house, bearing in mind that when I got with him, he had no money. It was all my money that had gone into buying the house. Obviously, I wasn't working at that point because I just had a third child. So I had, like, at that point, I think a 5-year-old, a 18-month-old, very hyperactive little boy, and a newborn. And then a year after that, we decided to remortgage. And everything was kind of, on the outside, it looked perfect. We had this lovely 4-bedroom house, garage, ensuite, overlooking the park, and everything on the outside. We looked like the ideal family. But he drank every day, and there was always issues at parties where he didn't care how flirty he was, and he'd go to the shop sometimes and disappear for 2 hours. It was that kind of thing, and I just brushed over it, and I thought, no, he looked, in other ways he looks after me, and he's great with the kids and stuff. So anyway, long story short, we remortgaged. We ploughed a load of it into refurbing the house, new lighting, bathrooms, flooring, and the other half was towards the business that we were going to set up, which was a huge care home. We both had masses of years of experience in that industry. And then all of a sudden something happened. He was off for 2 weeks on annual leave. I was a week away from giving birth, and he went back to work that day, had a meeting, had a handover meeting, and nothing was told about big changes to one particular care plan. So during the day, he was trying to catch up with reading the care plans, but in that time, obviously, you're expected to do your duties, and one of them was to oversee somebody having a bath, which he did. He ran it for him, and then he's supposed to stay outside, which he was doing, which he was sorting out laundry. When he knocked on the door every couple of minutes, one particular time he didn't answer. Long story short, this poor fellow had had a seizure standing next to the bath and had then fallen into the bath and drowned.
Oh.
It was horrendous. A huge investigation started. The CPS, Crown Prosecution Service, was involved. My husband was cleared of any wrongdoing on a criminal point of view. The company were very much supportive of him initially until they realised that somebody had to take the brunt of the responsibility. And long story short, on that one, it took 2 years to fight that in a court. And even though we proved on numerous occasions that they kept cheating and lying and changing dates and everything else, because when it happened, my husband had an intuition that something was going to go bad, and he took copies of everything. So when he literally knew it was going to turn bad and we went to court, he had copies of timetables and rotas and everything. So he was able to prove on so many occasions that they kept lying. But because that wasn't the court cases, that wasn't their thing, they weren't interested in the fact that they were lying. They were just interested in whether my husband was guilty or not. 2 years it took, and in that 2 years, I tried desperately he wasn't allowed to work in care. He was put on a list that he wasn't allowed to work in care because he was under investigation. I tried to go back to work on and off, but I at this point had a newborn baby, an 18-month-old hyperactive little boy, a 3-year-old little girl that had food intolerances, and a 7-year-old little girl. The cost of childcare would have been horrendous, which we couldn't afford at the time. I was trying to go to work. My husband drank every day in the corner, and he was completely obsessed with supporting his case. So it was the court case drink, the court case drink. That's all it was. And I remember at one point I think it was about 8 weeks in or something, and or 10 weeks in, and I remember holding our newborn, like, and saying, look, you need to hold your daughter. This is your fault. This is your child, and you haven't held her really since she was born. He was obsessed, and so of course it came down to me to do the dinners, put them in the bath, read them stories, get up, feed them, go through the rigmarole, and try to work in between, and that nearly killed me. It took 2 years to fight in court, and the money we had put aside for the company that we were going to run, that had to then pay the mortgage, which we'd remortgaged, was much higher now. Ultimately, we just couldn't do it. We just couldn't do it in those 2 years, and it ended up, excuse me, in court, and we lost the house. Lost everything, in fact, because we had 48 hours to get out of the house. That's what the judge said. You've got 48 hours to vacate, and then they're coming in to change the locks. So I literally had to hire vans, get the furniture into a friend's double garage who lived in one of the villages nearby. She said, "But put it in my garage for now." We put all of our furniture into the garage, stayed a couple of nights with friends and family, and then eventually we got a hostel that we were able to go to, which is, in no uncertain terms, was not very pleasant. We were there for 6 months, enjoyed it for 6 months. But in that time, I don't know if you remember, the country had huge floods. It was unprecedented.
Yes.
And all of my stuff in her garage was under 3 foot of water, because she was in a village. It was like it was just a floodplain. So all of my furniture, my suede sofas, everything got ruined. Even some of the kids' baby stuff, suitcases of clothes. So we lost not only our house at that point, but our belongings. 6 months in the hostel, eventually got given a house, and I'm so grateful for it. It was a housing house, but it was a 4-bedroom. So we were extremely grateful. I'm very lucky to get that, to be honest. And then just after we moved into there, which I think was the October and November, my dad became ill. He'd had a limp, and by the January he was diagnosed with stage 4 terminal cancer. And he'd been my rock. He'd been my rock all my life. Although he had his faults and he was an alcoholic, he'd also been my best friend all my life, and my confidant, and the person I went to with the DIY disaster, and it was my dad. And I basically helped, between my mum and I, take him back and forth to the hospital for his treatment, and watched him slowly die. And by the May, he was given a couple of weeks to live at most. He ended up living till May. But I watched him die slowly in front of me. But during that time, I remember sitting with my husband and said, well, one of the most important men in my life is going, but at least I can grow old with the other one. And he looked at me, and when someone looks at you with a face and you just kind of know something's wrong, and my stomach dropped. And he said, basically, it took him a while to get it out, but he said, I'm really sorry, that's not going to, that was it. First of all, he said, I'm really sorry, I don't think that's going to happen. And then he wouldn't say why for a long time, and I just kept saying, you can't just say that and not tell me why. And obviously at this point he was quite drunk as well. And then eventually he said to me, I've cheated on you with another man. And so at this point I was like, right, okay, so I've lost my home, I've lost my belongings, I'm losing my dad, and now I've just lost my husband. And the hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy, that kind of just collapsed.
Yeah.
And I just remember he then disappeared for a few days, went off somewhere. I don't know what happened. He disappeared, and kind of everybody was worried about where he was, what's happening to him. And I just remember going around in a bit of a daze with my dressing gown on. I think I took the kids to school in the car with my dressing gown on, and and things. I don't remember much about that, but I just remember being in a bit of shock, going through the motions, taking my dad back to the hospital. And then obviously that kind of all broke down, and I knew then that was the end of my marriage, because again, I can't have that. So it was a tough time, and that's the time when I kind of looked up and went, why me?
And yet you still kept going, and you've got a lovely phrase you say in the book. You got, you knew you had this belief, you knew you had this purpose, and that's what kept you going. And you say you then started a business And you started with zero budget, but 100% faith.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's wonderful. So what was that business? And is that what you're doing now?
Yes. I basically didn't know quite what it was I needed to do. So I started doing courses. I started investigating the purpose of life back then. I was like, I got into quantum science. I'm a bit of a science geek. And I got into quantum science. I went down the woo as well. And I started to realize that actually we aren't physical beings trying to attain a spiritual life. We're actually spiritual beings experiencing a physical life. And I started to realize that actually the universe doesn't exist until we exist. And so this is my universe, just like your universe. And what happens is the dimensional part of it is that they're all interconnected and they're all experiencing, and we experience each other in different ways. And I know this sounds really trippy, and it's hard to explain in words, but I really got into that in a huge way. And then I started to think, well, how can I implement that into my everyday life, and how can I make that helpful for other people? So then I started thinking, well, I need to come off the woo and the quantum a little bit, because that's a little bit far out there for some people. And I started looking into coaching and counseling, and I did some counseling courses. I then started to do some coaching courses. I went to, I think it was the Coaching Academy, and did the first course with them. And then just started to kind of watch certain people, Tony Robbins, Bob Proctor, Jim Rohn, you know, all these kind of, you know, Lisa Nichols, so many amazing people that I just started being obsessed watching constantly. And everything they were saying just totally resonated with me. And I was like, oh my God, yes, this is what I feel inside. This is what I know inside. And I know that actually what you think about, you bring about. And I know that. And I also knew, though, that there was huge blocks in me, because although I knew that I was, you know, that I had a bigger purpose, I knew that I was stuck in this rut, this hamster cycle of repeating the same patterns over and over again. So although I was learning lots about it on an outer perspective, I knew I then had to start dealing with it on an inner perspective. And so I started looking at, I had counseling. I started looking at coaches, and so I started to have coaching on myself. So I did the deep inner work on myself with the counseling and coaching, and I deep dived with some fantastic coaching with a few different coaches, and I really started putting the inner work in. And then I started to network, and so it evolved organically. And I had no money, and I was still working at this point, and still working, but I had no money, if you like, no capital to invest in me. So everything I was doing was either supported by my partner now, who I've been with for 10, 11 years, or I was paying for it from my wages, the spare bits of money that I had. Now, having 4 children and a home, you can imagine there isn't a lot spare.
Yes.
Always something in any family, but when you've got 4, you've then got, particularly now, teenagers that want all the latest brands. It's not cheap. So there wasn't ever a lot of disposable income, which again is some other factor that I thought I want to change that too, because I obviously have some money blocks, because I know abundance in the world. So all of this started to organically grow, and then I started to realize that actually, you know, I've done so much learning on myself. I've done so much learning on different courses. So I started to network, and I started to join groups, and I started to put myself out there a little bit. And then I thought, you know what, I'm actually ready now to start growing my own brand, because I know with my life experience, with the work I've done on myself, and don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of work to do on myself. And I believe anybody that says they've finished doing work on themselves should go back to coaching, because we're evolving all the time, we grow all the time, and there's always new experiences that we have all the time. And I think we're a bit like an onion, and as much as we peel the layers off, we're also putting layers on as well at different times. So there's still more to do. There's still more growing and spiritual growth that I want to do. But I started to realize that I was at a level where I could start to help others, because I was a bit further along than, say, you know, a small majority of people. So that's what I started to think. And then I thought, and then I came up with this name about us being, you know, when I started to look into the quantum and all of that, I started to, well, we are beautifully unique. There's like 400, I think it's 4 to the power of 25 is the odds of us being here. That's the odds of us being alive.
Okay.
So I started to think, my God, we are truly incredible. We're super amazing. We're superhuman. We have all this untapped potential. We're here and we're miracles, and every one of us is unique and has a unique experience. So I thought, that's beautifully unique. And then I thought, you're beautifully unique. If I'm telling it to someone else, you're beautifully unique. And then I thought, why be you? You're beautifully unique. And so just in those few moments, that whole little conversation I just had popped into my head. And I knew straight away that was my brand name, You're Beautifully Unique, Why Be You? Because why be you? Well, you're beautifully unique. So I just knew that was it. And then that was in the January 2019, I put that together. I finished working in July 2019. And from there, again, still no money, because I decided for the first year that I wasn't going to accept any money. I was going to do everything for experience, testimonials, and to kind of, for me to work out what I needed to get better at and what I was good at. Stuff. So that was my thing, is that I wouldn't charge any money for at least a year. And so that's what I did all of 2019. And I also, I think it was the April, joined a speaking academy and went from strength to strength in that, and then ended up being on the team empowering other people to speak and teaching other people to speak. I did the 5-day university course, which, because I'd done so much work with the university, I didn't pay the full price. It was a few £1,000s, and I certainly didn't have that. But I was able to do it because I put so much work in and supported the team and been there every single week. And yeah, you know, the universe rewards you in different ways, doesn't it? And I ended up having so many things given to me, gifted to me, which I didn't ask for, but were just presented to me. And I realized that was me and the universe working in my favor, because of all the things that I knew I was doing right and believed in, and all the work that I'd done on myself and unblocked on myself. That was the universe giving me everything I needed at the time. So everything was working amazingly, and it was just unfolding. And I didn't have a penny at this point still. I didn't have any capital to put into my business, but everything was given to me and presented to me. And then, you know, I just literally I did some coaching with people, and got testimonials. I was doing public speaking. I was running workshops. You know, I was coaching people to public speak. I joined Revival Sanctuary, you know, and I was in a magazine before as well, with an article in a previous magazine. And it's evolved organically, completely, without any ads, without any money put into it. And, you know, and then this year, obviously, we've had everything what's happened. So the whole year this year has been slightly off kilter with the plan, for everybody, not just me. But, you know, like we said at the beginning, before we started doing this interview, it's still been extremely busy. And in this time, I've co-authored a book. I've been in another magazine. I've had radio interviews. I'm involved in a charity book now as well. I've also done a chapter in someone else's book. I've done podcasts. I'm booked for speaking events. I've had to unfortunately cancel some already because of, you know, what's happening out there, COVID and everything. But I'm still booked for speaking events. I've got speaking events lined up for September in London. I've got them in Newcastle next year, and a couple of other places in the UK. And yeah, it's just going brilliantly. And you know, and I think it's going at the pace I like. It's going at the pace
Fantastic.
I like.
And it's true, you know, they say out of every adversity comes opportunity, and you've certainly embraced that, and you are living, breathing proof of that. And for those of you who are watching this interview and would like to get hold of a copy of this book, Revival, Women Embracing Their Superpowers, you can do so from Amazon or by going to revivalsanctuary.co.uk. The book is available there. You will find out more about Revival Sanctuary there as well, which Ali has spoken about. And thank you very much, Ali, for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me. And I hope I didn't waffle on too long, but yeah, it's been a pleasure to be here, Deb. Thank you so much for interviewing. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I just want to plug the book. You know, if anybody that's ever had any doubts on whether they should continue, if they're struggling, this book is all about giving you the you know, empowering you to kind of have the faith that you can do it, and you are beautifully unique, and you are incredibly amazing, and you all have superpowers.
Thank you, Ali. That's great.